Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mrs. Carpenter, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Ashley? Here. Mr. Churchman?
Here.
Dr. Daniels?
Here.
Mr. Gilmore?
Here.
Mr. Parker?
Here.
Mr. Poland?
Here.
Mrs. Wilhelm?
And Mrs. Wilhelm had indicated to us, I believe, at our last meeting that she would not be able to attend tonight. So we do have a quorum to conduct our business, and our first item is actually a public hearing related to the 2007-2008 budget. The budget has been published, and we had at our last meeting, we set up this date and time for this public hearing. I've asked Mr. Diener if he would make a brief presentation related to the budget and the process. So we'll consider this hearing open, and after his presentation, we'll ask for public comments. And after public comments, we'll close the hearing, and then we'll have a discussion about the budget in our regular business session. So, Mr. Diener, good evening. Looking forward to your comments.
Good evening. Thank you very much. This evening, we're just going to go through a few items that we have already presented to the board and to the public twice before. Once at the public workshop that occurred on July the 31st, and then also about 2 weeks ago this evening when we had our regular August 2nd meeting. This is the official public hearing. And this evening, for the public's awareness, we have created a guide to the proposed budget. And for those that are here this evening, we have copies available for you. We'd also say for the listening public, if you would go to the district website, and I'll go through this process real quickly, you can go to About Us, into the Business and Finance section, going to the Business and Finance site, under budget reports, and if you remember all that, you will find that you can get to the guide to the to the proposed budget, and it has the full something like 70 pages that constitute this information that the board's reviewing for this evening. It not only has the numbers, but it also has a lot of narrative on the background and how we got to the place that we are right now. Just a reminder that this was not a short process. It's a long process that has involved the public and the board, starting back when we were talking about the goals in January, through the months of preliminary information in May and June, the budget workshop we already talked about, and then this evening finalizes the statutory responsibilities of the board to keep the public informed and provide for them an opportunity to respond. The budget, we just need to remind the board that it does fulfill some extremely important obligations of maintaining the organization, whether that's enrollment size or opening new facilities, or also planning for the compensation and benefits for the 4,000 plus employees. It involves 6 levy funds that are very critical to us in the things that they provide, but also how that impacts our taxpayers and our patrons. The general fund is based on 650 enrollment growth. The supplemental general fund is based on the utilization of the 30%, which is our district's legal maximum authority. The extraordinary growth fund is the fund that is reviewed and authorized by the Board of Tax Appeals, and we are suggesting and making recommendation that we use 100% of that authority. It talks about a capital outlay fund, which this year has been set at 4 mills, and currently we're discussing increasing that to a level of 5.5 mills to accommodate for some operating expenditures that were moved to the capital outlay fund to free up some operating opportunities. The bond and interest fund, of which is one of the points of discussion for this evening, and the special assessment fund, which are items that need to be provided for on an annual basis. At this point in time, based on input that the board has provided to staff and the information that we have provided and created budgets around, the board is entertaining looking at projected levies of anywhere from a half to a mil reduction. That's still up for discussion, and it can go either way, but that's sort of where we're at this point in time. That concludes the comments I would have at this point in time. The remaining the budget development timeline is simply the fulfillment of the public hearing, followed by any final board discussions and approval of the budgets.
Thank you, Mr. Diener. At this point, we'd like to open up the podium for public comment. If there's anyone who wishes to comment to the board about the budget or the budget process, would you please do so at the podium directly to my right, and ask that you please state your name and address when you come. Don't all rush the podium at one time. Anyone wishing to address the board with respect to the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, we'll consider the public hearing closed. And with that, we'll move on to the business part of our meeting, which relates to what's listed in our agenda as item 7.01, adoption of 2007-2008 budgets. And I wanted to make some opening remarks, if I could, related to when we met a couple of weeks ago and we approved the notice of public hearing and set the maximum budget authority that we put out there. We were needing some additional information, and we've been in discussions with Mr. Diener and getting that additional information, and the concept of looking at potentially reducing the mill levy another half a mil, or targeting another half mil reduction related to the bond and interest levy. And we've received some additional information about that. One of the things that we had a question on was, is it possible to tap into other types of contingency funds or other reserves to take care of any interest or bond principal payments that might be required that weren't otherwise levied for? And we found out from our bond counsel that we have no ability to do that. According to Kansas statute, has to be in the bond interest fund, monies that come from the mill levy there or from also the earnings on the funds there. So that answered one of the questions. The other one, one of the important ones that I had was, were there additional funds within the bond and interest fund that could be available, some type of reserve, which we probably haven't discussed before. We focused on a lot of cash reserves and other funds in the past. And the answer to that we found out is that there is some additional funding there, about $2 million worth. And we were concerned about the potential of a $900,000 potential interest bill that we would pay on the first installment, if you will, of the bonds we might issue if the bond passes in October. As I thought about that some more, if we were to issue $30 to $50 million worth of bonds in December, let's say, and we still have to look at how we'd want to issue those bonds, those funds are going to sit in investable accounts until we're ready to use them. So I would question whether even $900,000 is a number we're going to incur in actual net interest costs. So I say all that just to tell you, board, that I've had my questions answered with respect to, do I believe there's another more ability to reduce the mill and another half a mil, the levy in the bond and interest fund, and I believe there is. And I'd like to see if there is support among the board to do that tonight, or if there's any additional questions anybody has with respect to the items we left unanswered at our last meeting.
Mr. Gilmore, I'll give you my thoughts on that. First off, I appreciate your comments, and thanks to Mr. Diener and the staff on providing us with information that you have over the past week. I know there have been a lot of hours put into that. I think where we are today is a place that we haven't arrived at by happenstance. It's been a carefully well thought out plan that's transpired over the last several years. As we look before the bond initiatives that we have out in front of the community, or that we will shortly, there are some great opportunities for the community to move forward and support doing the right kinds of things. I think where we are this evening with having the discussion around the additional half mil is the right direction to go. It's a continuation of the path that we've set upon here recently, and we should continue that. We certainly, as a board, have demonstrated the ability to be prudent and responsible in managing the mill levy, and we'll continue to do that during the upcoming year. In my mind, we have options in front of us, even options that don't surround necessarily the issuance of bonds and how that'll be financed. That's one component. So I think the right thing to do is to take the additional half mil, and I support what you said, Mr. Gilmore.
Well, I missed the great discussions of the last meeting, but was brought up to date by numerous sources, and I would fully support your position, Mr. President.
I had numerous questions, and then have had conversations with Mr. Diener, and appreciate all the information that Mr. Diener presented. And concern was about the bond and interest payment, as we expressed at the last board meeting, being able to make that in 2008. Understood that we have the additional $2 million that's available. And I do have concerns going forward into the future about our mill levy in the future and being able to meet our obligations, bond and interest obligations. I do think we have some options in front of us that we would be able to exercise. How we structure those bond and interest payments, certainly it will be an option that we'll have going forward. And keeping $900,000, that's what half a mil represents to us in the community, in the business community, and for our families. I think it's good for our local economy. So although I have reservations, I am concerned about the future, but I think that based upon what we've done historically, we can be responsible, we can be creative, and we can manage this. So based on that, I would be supportive of that as well, with the caveat that we need to remember this a year from now when we're sitting here and we are looking at some bond and interest payments and things that we need to do. If it comes to be that we need an increase in the mill levy to support that, we have to, I'm on record to say that I would support that. I'm in favor of this evening with reservations.
Mr. Parker, those are my words exactly. While I will support the board if our desire is to go ahead and keep that $900,000 within the community, I do think it's incumbent upon us that we understand that there will be a significant mill levy increase in the next year. And so what we're doing now is reducing a mill with the knowledge that it will increase next year. There will not be an option for it, not.
I think if we look at the discussion we had last year, there was a concerted effort to lower the mill levy in preparation for what we're going about now, and we've said then that when it's time to lower the mill levy, we'll do that. When it's time to raise it, we'll do that as well. And I want to echo that sentiment. I think that there are things that we'll be able to do effectively that will prevent us from having a significant mill levy increase next year. But you know, there's still a lot of planning sessions and things to go through prior to that time. But once again, where we are today and what we have in front of us for the next year is certainly not a surprise. That's what we've planned for. We're right where we knew we would be, and we've got plans going forward to continue the responsible mill levy management that we've set forth. So I'm not concerned about that in the least. Doesn't mean that we don't have some things to do, but we'll take care of that, and we'll be okay.
Ms. Ashley, you want to weigh in on this?
Well, yes. I have great angst about what is going to happen next year and how much of a fluctuation we can anticipate in the mill levy, knowing that we have a bond issue coming up, and that truly is where my greatest concern comes in. I will refer all of the phone calls to the rest of my fellow board members if there's a huge swing in property taxes, because that's going to affect house payments, and it's going to impact budgets. And while I understand the importance of being cautious about how we spend money, I also know that, gosh, if house payments go down $30 this year, but then they go back up $60 next year, that's tough. That's real tough. I'm very concerned about that. I appreciate the fact that we're trying to budget wisely, but I think we definitely have to keep that in mind. Would not be a good scene.
I volunteer to take your phone calls.
Thank you.
And I also I didn't address this in my remarks, but I hear everything that you all are saying, and I appreciate your perspectives, and I'm not supporting this knowing that we probably aren't going to have some kind of an increase next year. That is for certain. We have been talking for several years that increase is coming. But I also think we are wise to. The philosophical thing that's challenged here is that everybody's going to focus on an increase later and never the decreases that we've provided in the past couple of years. And that I understand the political realities of that. That's something, though, that I'm willing to take on personally, and continue to remind the public as we talk about this that we've been posturing the last couple of years to get to this position because we know we're going to have an increase of some sort next year. To what magnitude remains to be seen as we go through a process of studying how we structure any kind of bonds and how we handle our operating budgets and all of our associated mill levy funds next year.
And I just want to add to that because, you know, if you look at where we've been, we've adjusted the mill levy and we've done some record things in this district. And I could go on and talk about compensation level for teachers, benefits for part-time employees, our acceleration of digital technology in the classrooms, our expanded curriculum, new schools, record investment in capital outlay over the last 2 years. I mean, it just goes on, and those are all good things. And at the same time, we've had the opportunity to provide tax relief in a measured way to the community. And, you know, I'll say again that when you take a dollar out of the community's pocket, you can never repay that. And so there are a number of things that we can do to continue the effective management of this mill levy going forward and still accomplish all the things that we need to do that is consistent with the level of excellence in the school district. And it's going to be a year-long process, and we certainly need to be mindful of it. But I'm very confident that it can be done.
This agenda item is to take action on the budget. And before we do that, though, I wanted to ask Dr. Aul, you know, we're planning a significant study session in October, mid-October, related to looking strategically at our operating budgets and so forth and going into the future and trying to better plan for the years that are out there. One of the issues that's going to come up in that discussion is the county sales tax. And I know the county commissioners were talking and discussing about that today, and I wanted to ask Dr. Aul if she could provide us with an update if she knows the outcome of their meeting this afternoon.
I've had a brief report, so I can't say that I've had a chance to study this fully, but the county commissioners did have a workshop session this afternoon to discuss placing the last quarter-cent of sales tax on the ballot for what's been referred to as the jail administration, justice administration, I think juvenile detention center, and other things related, crime lab. And what this has and implications for Olathe and other Johnson County school districts, but I can only speak for Olathe, is that $5.4 million is what we get in the sales tax. That is in the current operating budget for this school district right now for programs and services and compensation and salaries. And so that tax then, if that were to occur, that tax sunsets in 2008, and our budget will carry us through 08-09. But in 2009, the board needs to keep in mind that that's a year when potentially we would not have that in our budget. And secondly, and that's our operating budget, which is the more challenging side of this discussion. And then secondly, we would that would occur in the same year that we do not have a state plan at this point for school funding. So there are some potential implications here. And I think I would hope that the board would be paying attention to that, and we're trying to gather some additional information. $5.4 million is equivalent of 3 mills to the property tax payers of Olathe. And that's $5.4 million really pays for about 120 teachers. So it's a significant part of what we do. It's not the only revenue source. It's not the major revenue source, but we will have to plan for it. And so if that revenue source goes away, then when we talk in October, as we look out for 3 or 4 years, I think it's going to be a good discussion on the board's part for us to forecast and plan how we're going to support the operations of the school district, and the mill levy will be part of that. The mill levy may not be the biggest issues we're facing because we have some benefits going forward of increased assessed valuation and other opportunities, but it may be accessing the dollars we want in the operations side to do what we might have as priorities, both in programs and services to challenge learners and all students, as well as compensation and new business costs, whether it's health care or other things in the budget. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. This has moved along a lot faster than we had thought, and I think that's what I wanted to get you up to date on a little bit, that things are happening pretty quickly.
All right, thank you, Dr. Aul. Mr. Parker?
Will it wait until October the 16th before we have our study session, but we'll have an opportunity to weigh in on this issue?
Well, we're going to continue to monitor that. That's what we originally planned. I mean, if we need to do something more quickly, then I guess we can. But we're hopeful that we can wait till October. It's my understanding the commission is looking to put this on the ballot in August of next year. So with that kind of a time frame, seems to me there's plenty of time for us to have a collective dialogue. At least I hope that's the case.
I do think there was some discussion today for them to add this as a business agenda item next time that they met. And so I don't know what their time frame is, and I'll try to inquire and get some additional information maybe that I could share back.
But if we need to accelerate that conversation, I think we're going to need to. I mean, we don't want to just say because October's the date, we're not going to talk about it.
I guess I have another question of Mr. Diener in regard to the $2 million that's been referenced that is available in the bond and interest fund that could cover the interest expense that we will have from the new bond issue. Was that not designated for anything? Where has this money surfaced?
Those dollars, there's a line in the budget workshop form that's provided by the state that's called a cash basis reserve. And it is designed for boards to utilize and allocate funds to ensure that you will always be able to pay debt. That's probably, I mean, obviously the contracts we have with our staff are very important, but for the bond ratings and for the financial integrity of this organization, to not be able to make a bond payment would be critical. And so that allows for boards to put in some dollars there to ensure that they'll always be there. And just in case the county's not able to make payments, or just in case the assessed valuations don't come in as anticipated, it provides that a little additional cushion. And that is something that in the past has been upwards of $9 million that we've been carrying there. It is at the lowest point it probably has been since the early 90s at this point in time, at a $2 million level. But it is there, and it can be tapped for this purpose. Mm-hmm.
Gary, a related question to that, if I could. Other than I know that when it had gotten accumulated to a fairly high number, there was some intentional spending down of that reserve balance, if you will. Yes. Outside of that, has that reserve in your history ever been tapped for unexpected shortfalls in the bond and interest fund to make payments?
That I'm not sure, to be right honest, because in some cases, without direct discussion by the board on how to utilize or how to prepare for that interest payment to become due in the first March or the first September payment, perhaps in the back of people's minds, and I haven't been working with the bond fund except for about the last 4 or 5 years, that may have been designed there, and so when the question was asked, the response was simply that the funding is available in a cash flow process. So whether or not it's been used or not, it's hard to say. But it's been there and it's gone down, so probably by virtue of the fact that it's gone down, one might conclude that it has been used. I would say that the board did see an increase in the mill levy about the time, we've talked about that before, when Northwest and Prairie Trail came online and the mill levy went up about 4 mills. It was during that time that $9 million was reduced to the $2 million. So there was some stabilization of the mill levy that was going on during that time that allowed that increase to be restricted to just 4 mills. So I would make that comment.
So would it be your opinion that if we did utilize some of those funds for the interest on the new bond issue, assuming that we agree that we're going to further reduce the mill levy for 0708, that we would want to look to replenish those funds? Is there a level in that reserve account that we should maintain?
That will be at the board's discretion. I would only reflect that it's been $2 million, and it would be my recommendation that we, if we were to use those dollars, it would be my recommendation in planning for the next budget year, a year from now, that we would create a budget that would continue to maintain that $2 million, yes.
I'd like to know if we've actually ever used it to dip into for unplanned events to fund bond and interest. I'd like to know exactly on that, because I'm not I don't recollect the board ever agreeing to have a cash reserve in that account, and I don't think that's a prudent use of the money. We have a bond and interest fund that is typically tied to what our levels of debt are and our interest payments. So if we could provide that specific information back to the board, and I would speculate we'll find out that we haven't used that for that occasion, but I'd like to know exactly.
Yeah, I would say I won't be able to provide that answer, Mr. Churchman, simply because whether or not you spent those dollars for that purpose or for the purpose of preparing for cash balances the next year is something that that question doesn't have an answer.
I think the only thing you could provide is the history of that balance.
I can provide you the history of the balance, yeah. I think what I'm trying to say, Mr. Churchman, is that if there's a cash balance in any fund, it would be difficult to say why that cash balance existed. Was it because we underspent on utilities? Was it because we didn't fully have a full capacity of all of our paras? We had, we weren't able to hire as many people as we wanted to. Was it because the new teachers that we hired came in at less salaries than what others went out? I mean, does that make sense why it would be difficult to answer that? I can give you the cash balances, though, the history.
That'd be fine, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Diener, just to rephrase that a different way, have we ever felt uncomfortable about the possibility of making a bond payment?
I would say no. I would say because of those cash balances, that was in the cash balance reserve, that was the protection for that. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments related to this item? If there are none, we'll entertain a motion, please.
Mr. Gilmore, I would move that we approve the 2007-2008 budget modified to a mill levy of 64.167 mills and authorize the budgets for submission to the Kansas State Department of Education and the county clerk for certification.
Second.
Been moved by Mr. Churchman, seconded, was that you, Mr. Poland? Okay. Clarification, Mr. Diener, for you in terms of that action, is that clear in terms of what you need to do to move forward?
I'll just repeat it just to make sure. What I will be doing is taking the notice of hearing and looking at the bond and interest fund that was as reported with the $900,000. I'll take that $900,000 out, which would in essence lower the bond and interest fund a projected around 0.5 mils. All other funds remaining the same as currently reviewed. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Does that sound clear to everyone? Okay. Any further discussion or questions? Mrs. Carpenter?
Mr. Churchman,
Yes.
Ms. Ashley,
No.
Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Poland,
Yes.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Item 7.02 deals with policy revisions for student activities, policy JH. Do we need any information presented on this, Dr. All?
I just wanted to make one point of clarification on that policy. What you would be approving tonight is the policy. We're working with our staff, principals, and others to develop the guidelines for that, so that's still in progress. This is just a policy approval.
And when do we expect that to be completed?
Well, first of all, we are meeting with junior high principals, and we'll have to meet with high school principals, and we will take input from them and also for the draft that our legal counsel has prepared for guidelines. So I would hope that we could have that ready by early September, end of August, as soon as we get through. I think next week are the meetings.
So then, Dr. All, we would have another approval on that, potentially at the September board meeting?
I would not necessarily recommend that. I think what we're asking for is the policy change to allow us to administratively develop the guidelines that implement that policy.
Thank you.
I'd just like a clarification on that because it does say all student activities within the Board of Education's adopted guidelines.
That is true. It does say that. I'm not sure, though, that it's referencing the guidelines specific to this change because you have lots of other guidelines in student handbooks and whatever. So if I'll get an opinion on that, and if that needs to come back, I'll bring that back.
Mr. President, I move to approve revision of student activity policy JH.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or comments? Mrs. Carpenter?
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Mr. Churchman?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
And that motion is approved. Item 7.03 deals with substitute teacher compensation. Dr. All, do you have any comments on this item before we discuss or take action?
I don't. We've had this presented before. Mr. Odell's here, and he's available to address any questions on the board's part for this.
If there are no questions or comments, we'll entertain a motion for approval, please.
Mr. Gilmore, I move that we approve payment incentives for unused illness and bereavement leave, which is earned by long-term substitutes.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Mrs. Carpenter?
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Mr. Churchman?
Yes.
That motion carries. And then 7.04 relating to elementary handwriting resources adoption. Again, Dr. All, I'll defer to you. Do you have any comments about that before we discuss or take action?
I would just indicate that we have Dr. Banikowski here, and I believe on staff part who's been responsible for this, Mary Jo Fox, and this has followed the same process that we do for every other curriculum resource adoption that's going forward. So if there are questions about this, we'd be glad to take that, and we have staff available to answer those questions.
Any questions or comments? And we'll entertain a motion for approval of this item.
Mr. Gilmore, I move that we approve new handwriting resources for elementary students as recommended.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Churchman, seconded by Mr. Poland. Any further discussion? Mrs. Carpenter?
Mr. Gilmore?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Mr. Churchman?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
We have a future action item on our agenda related to bond counsel service agreement. It's item 8.01, and I guess at this point I'd just like to ask board members if there's any questions they have on that item, any additional information that you'd like to see or for Dr. All to present as we look to take action on that in a future meeting. I don't hear any, so we'll move on. 9.01 is an update related to committee assignments and special meetings. And you've had that updated information. Have we heard from everyone on this now, Dr. All? Or do we need to do some additional work there?
I think we've heard from everyone but now one board member. And so in terms of expressing their interests in that, so I haven't had a chance to, provide any feedback for getting that together, but I do think it's been positive to see that we have board interest in serving on a variety of district committees, and I think that will help us deal with vast amounts of information and the processes as we cycle things through the board meetings. So if we can perhaps wait and get that cleared up, that would maybe be helpful, and then come back and send that out to everybody and come back in September and finalize that. And also, I'm not sure that we have all the input in on site councils.
No.
And so the site council piece is another piece that if we could have that from board members to Betty, as clerk of the board, that would be helpful too.
And I'll meet with Dr. All on this too. We may have to provide some feedback to you all about where we've got more than 2 board members in any one committee or place. We may have to ask for some voluntary adjustments to that unless someone feels very strongly about it, and then we'll just have to deal with calling a public meeting, giving notice of public meeting for those committees to meet. So your additional input on that as we work through that over the next few weeks will be appreciated. Last item on our agenda relates to an executive session.
Mr. Gilmore, prior to moving towards that, I'd like to bring up an issue. We had talked about a special board meeting on the 3rd week of September, and I have a conflict that's arisen with that, and just wanted to see if we could evaluate alternative dates outside of that week.
That whole week?
Yes.
Let's see, what was that original date, Mr. Churchman?
September 20th.
I'm sorry, September 20th was the date. That's the 3rd Thursday of the month.
That would have been our normal second meeting date. What's your pleasure, board? Do you have another date that works for everyone? You want to look at the next week?
We'd be here 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, we would. We would be here the end of September, 1st of October.
Dr. All and Mr. Gilmore, what was our agenda for that? What's proposed to do then?
The September 16th meeting was proposed as your board workshop to address board goals and action plans and talk about any priorities that the board would like to discuss moving forward. So it is helpful if we have the entire board there for that process.
Is there an alternative date? And are you going that whole week, Mr. Churchman?
I am.
The 24th and 25th work on my particular personal calendar. I don't know how that works for everyone else. That's a Monday or Tuesday.
I teach on Monday evenings until 6:30. And so the soonest I could be here would probably be 7:15, and I might be relatively stupid by then.
How about Tuesday the 24th?
Tuesday, the 25th.
25th, excuse me.
Tuesday, the 25th, I would say is I think it's the launch of our Citizens Education Academy. We might be able to facilitate or coordinate that in some way. I don't know where we are yet on getting people interested in that date and if we have any people signed up yet. So, Dr. Berry, do we have anybody signed up? How many, do you know? Just a few. So, I mean, if that ends up being the date, you know, we can take a look at that. We could also look at Thursday. Just let me check that a minute.
The 26th, the 27th, the 28th don't work for me that week.
Well, let us see what we can do on the Citizens Education Academy that night, and you'd have to set this at your September board meeting anyway. And then we also need Mrs. Wilhelm's schedule as well as we're trying to do that. So if we try for the 25th and that doesn't work out, then Betty will be working with each of you to find an alternative date.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. All, I misspoke. The 27th does work for me. I was looking at the wrong date.
Yeah, that's, I don't have any problem with that either.
Well, based on that, why don't we check with Mrs. Wilhelm, and then we can put it on the September agenda to set that date whenever we know everybody's calendar is clear. Okay, thank you, Mr. Churchman, for bringing it up.
I appreciate the consideration on behalf of the board.
Well, it is important that we try to have everyone there if we can for these kind of planning meetings, if you will, talking about we haven't visited our board goals since January, and we need to revisit those and set the course for this next year. Okay, item 10.01 is dealing with executive session, and I'd recommend, in speaking with Dr. Rawl, that we target 45 minutes, so we'd say till 8:30. If we need to extend, we'll come back in and extend, but we'll target 45 minutes, if someone will make that motion.
Mr. Gilmore, I move that we recess to executive session to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel to protect the privacy interests of the individuals, to be discussed to return to special session at 8:30 p.m.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Churchman and Ms. Ashley for the motion. Mrs. Carpenter?
Mr. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Poland,
Yes.
Ms. Ashley,
Yes?
Mr. Churchman,
Yes.
Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore.
Yes. And we are adjourned to executive session till 8:30 p.m.